All right, folks. So let's dive into this topic. Basically, why should I care about accessibility? Now, we've had two sessions before this. One was centered around designing for ADHD. The second one was fundamentals of accessibility and accessible design. And again, great talks. What I wanted to do with this one was to give you a reason to actually care about those talks as well. And if this, in the end, changes your perspective, changes your mind, if it's possible to go back and rewatch them or dive into other details, that's kind of the objective of this session. So let me start off by telling you, there's a couple of people on here who know I'm a big Apple fanboy. And this was a movie that I had missed. And just about, I think last week, I was watching this in my living room on a rather, high-end TV with like lots of HDR and whatnot. And one thought occurred to me while this was going on. Suddenly, I started realizing that this movie could end up rushing someone to the hospital. And I know it's a weird thing to say, but I'm going to talk about why I had that realization and how it connects to accessibility a little later in this presentation. But I'm going to leave you with that for now and start off by firstly giving you a couple of pointers. So accessibility as a topic, a lot of times is not very common. It's people, avoid talking about things because we are not equipped with the right terminology. So I want to start off by giving you these three terms. So the conversations about accessibility are simple. The first one is person with disability. Now, I myself have done this. I have been referring to people with disabilities as differently abled. And in fact, one of the podcasts that Santrupti mentioned, the Design My FM podcast, the first two episodes of that were about disability, about accessibility. And I was constantly referring to people with disabilities as differently abled. And the problem with that is specially abled or differently abled are terms which are exclusionary. They do not include the people you're talking about. And the term person with disability is sort of an acknowledgement that, yes, I know you have a disability, and that's how I'll treat you and talk about things with you, right? So the first term officially that you should be using to refer to people who have accessibility needs are persons with disability. Secondly, instead of using term normal user, stick to terms like typical users. And I think in one of the sessions, Santrupti did, she used the term neurotypical a lot because that session was around accessibility, about ADHD. And that's where I sort of picked up the term typical users, because it's okay to say that, that's the set of users that you typically do design for. They're not the normal users, they're the typical users. And they're the ones, maybe the people without disabilities. But that acknowledges at the same time that there are people with disabilities who are the atypicals. And lastly, a lot of you may have seen this term A11Y thrown out around. It's actually pronounced ally. It's short for accessibility because it's the 11 letters between A and Y that make up accessibility. So it's used firstly to abbreviate accessibility because accessibility as a word itself is too long to pronounce. And secondly, it also gives this ally connotation to say that you care about people with disabilities, right? So these three terms, you're now equipped to have any conversations about accessibility in the chat or otherwise later. All right. So before I get into how this topic was chosen, I was thinking about a set of other things. I was thinking about a talk on demystifying accessible design. I was thinking about a talk which is more like a what if talk, what future of accessible design could look like. And while I was doing that, I was discussing this with someone in my team, and they said a very simple thing. They said, why should I care about accessibility in the first place? And that sort of was a light bulb moment to me, that before we even get to the point where we are talking about things around accessibility, why it's important, how you should design, etc., we all need to, as designers, start caring about accessibility in the first place. So that is what we're going to talk about. And hopefully I can maybe change your perspective on accessible design as part of this talk. Let's dive right in. Point number one, why you should care about accessible design is staying relevant. Basically, the more you mature as a designer in the industry, you're going to move closer to working on edge cases, right? Details that matter beyond the typical set of you. Think about it yourself, but it also describes it's a description in a way that someone without vision might want to know what that photo is. Startups, mature. What I'm trying to say is that in Bangalore, especially where the startup scene is quite hot, all of you, or rather, a lot of you are probably in startups, or you've been in startups, or you've been building things from 0 to 1. Um, and that's kind of where you've been, right? But some of you are going to move on from that world into more mature organizations. In fact, some startups themselves will stop being startups. They'll start being more mature organizations. As a comparison, startups care about things like exponential growth, making money, and looking good while doing it, right? But when you talk about mature organization, here is their app to order a pizza, and they had like billions of dollars in losses because of that. That's where mature organizations don't want to be. And lastly, looking good virtuously. A lot of the organizations, when they become big, they care about how they look from a social perspective. And that's where the difference between startups and mature organizations is very contrasting. And if you are a designer that is currently in the startup scene and is really focused on just caring about 0 to 1, it's okay for you to not pay attention to accessibility right up. But if you know that you're going to at some point grow out of this, you're going to get to other organizations where accessibility is going to be an important thing. At that point, you want to start thinking about it. Now, here's another perspective on why staying relevant, accessibility, all of that works, right? I'm going to try and draw a parallel. So physical accessibility in Western cultures across the ages has moved on like this. Ancient civilizations, survival of the fittest. Middle Ages, limited to things like religious places, monasteries, churches, those kind of things. When Industrial Revolution happened and a lot more buildings popped up and things like that, people started thinking about how to make those buildings accessible. Finally, in the 20th century is when things like the Americans with Disability Act, Section 508, all of these things, they started mandating accessibility in federal government. And at this point, it is a fundamental aspect of the physical architecture. The little point that Satrupti mentioned in the beginning of the talk, where my time in the US, I was able to notice so many things that were in buildings that I was working in, moving in and out of, that that's when I was like, okay, wait, like someone can really think about accessibility properly, implement it in a building, and make lives easier for people. So this was how physical accessibility went across the ages. If I talk about digital accessibility, you'll see a similar trend. 1960s, internet was new, accessibility was really a primary consideration. 1990s, which is around the time when the ADA Section 508, which I mentioned in the previous slide, they came into being, and that's when W3C released WCAG, which is the Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is stuff that Karima mentioned in her talk last time. 2000s, that's when a lot more people started coming online, and accessibility became even more popular. Governments, advocacy groups, all of them realized that, hey, accessibility is important. If you're not doing it right, it's unethical. And now, and this is why the direction or the context of the Western culture, right? Accessibility is a fundamental aspect of digital design now. And with the rise of mobile devices, social media, e-commerce, all of that, it's even more important. Now, this was how things moved in the Western culture. Why are we talking about this right now? Because India is changing. What do I mean by that? A lot of you have heard of the term geofication. That's when we moved Like there was a big boom in internet usage in India. You've all heard about UPI, which has enabled massive digital payments. The way India is changing, a lot more things are going to happen. And one of those things will be accessibility. And why it is important to pay attention is before Geo came into the picture, we did not think about how fast we will start adopting the use of internet. Before UPI was a thing, we did not realize how important digital payments are going to become. And accessibility is just going to be one of those things which would just suddenly come and you wouldn't even realize it's here. And that is why you could be the one leading this change. And simply put, if you are not doing it, someone else is going to do it. So if you want to stay relevant as a designer in the industry as it matures, you need to be taking charge of what's happening. Let's move on to point number 2. Thou shalt be disabled. What I mean here is that at some point or the other in your lives, you will face a disability. Now, it sounds rude if I just put it like this, but let's talk about what I mean. A lot of times when we are talking about accessibility, and we are only thinking of people with permanent disabilities. We're thinking of people who are either blind or deaf or can't speak or have lost a limb. And yes, the accessible world is definitely full of those people, or the accessibility world is full of those people. But there's also another type of disability, which is temporary. This is something, again, which Garima had mentioned in her talk too, but I'm going to repeat it here because I'm also going to give you an instance. This was a time when I went for an eye checkup to an eye doctor, obviously. And the doctor put some eye drops in my eyes to do the test. And as I was about to leave the building, they said, "Hey, where are you going? You wouldn't be able to see outside because the drops that I just put in your eyes have dilated your pupils." And I was like, okay, it's too late to tell me now because I have to get back home for something urgent. And that's when I realized that I came here not by car, but I drove. I took an Uber. And that's when I realized that, okay, now with this, I'm going to have to look at my phone, which is a bright screen to begin with, but I can control the brightness on that, book an Uber, step out into the afternoon sun, and try and guess when my Uber is arriving. It's at that point that I realized that I, just like someone else who cannot permanently see or has low vision, I could also have that temporarily. And at that point, I would want things that I'm using to be accessible enough so I can do what I need to as if I normally did it. If any of you have ever had a fracture or a throat infection, and I know it's not a common problem, but your smart speaker refused to recognize who you are because your voice didn't sound the same, you have all experienced temporary disabilities. If I talk about the third kind, which is situational disabilities, these are things which, are not things that have happened to you, but you are in a situation because of which you cannot do the things that you normally do. The best example of this is if you've been in a concert or a restaurant where the music is really loud and you're trying to talk to your friend and you're unable to hear what they're saying. That's an example of where you, because of a situation, could not hear. And I love making this joke that I wish people came with subtitles. So in such situations, you could just turn on subtitles and hear what they're saying. The last one over here, which is new parent, that's something that's even more relevant to me. Since I've had a kid, I have been in so many situations where one arm of mine is just completely unavailable to me and I have to do something. And that's when I realized that, why is this so difficult? These are all examples of situations where you yourself could be disabled, either temporarily, situationally, God forbid, permanent. And it doesn't even need to be you. It could be a close friend, a family member. All of these things, are important to think about. And it is because of this that you need to think, what kind of a world are you designing for yourself? When you are in such a situation, are you going to look back at your own product and say that, oh man, I wish I would have done a better job for me in this situation? Yep. So that is point number 2, which is at some point in your life, you could face a disability, at which point you want to design a better world for yourself. But moving on to point number 3, it is the right thing. Obviously, like designing, making sure everyone's included, designing for accessibility is the right thing to do. But let me call back um, to that particular poster that I showed you and talk about. I'm looking at the chat as well and laughing and talk about what I meant when I was talking about this poster. Now, have a lot of you seen these warnings when you're either watching a video or you started looking at watching a movie or um, flashing lights, photo sensitivity warning, stuff like that. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and firstly tell you what it's related to. It is related to something known as epilepsy, where one could have seizures because of flashes of light, which cause a problem with the nerve cell activity in your brain, right? And it's a dangerous thing if it happens in the wrong place. Now, I'm going to demonstrate why I'm talking. There are going to be 2 videos that are playing. There are going to be some flashing lights. So I'm just going to give you a warning for that up front. But let's look at what's happening on the next slide. This is a video of my living room of that TV I was talking about. Notice the video on the left and the right and the difference between. This is a scene where Steve Jobs in this movie is stepping out to the theater and there's a lot of cameras running, but therefore there's a lot of flashlights happening. See what happens on the right side when the left side is like really, really bright. You see how the TV is just, it's not showing the same amount of light coming out on the right? You know, why that is happening? This is because of something called dim flashing lights. What is that? It's a setting in Apple devices. I was watching this movie on my Apple TV and I did not have this turned on. But when I was watching the movie, the scene showed up. I got so uncomfortable with the light that was in the room. I started, thinking back. There's a friend of mine who has this condition. And I was thinking, what if he was sitting with me? And this could have become a situation where I was enjoying a movie to me rushing to the hospital because something bad just happened. And I really want to thank that one designer or the team of designers at Apple who thought about this and brought it to us. But why am I talking about this particular feature? And why was it not in the iPhone from iPhone 1, right? The first iPhone. The answer to that is HDR. All of us who love technology, who like the latest things, are really happy when someone says, my screen can do HDR, my TV does HDR, my phone does HDR. But what additionally has HDR done? It has changed the peak brightness that comes out of the screen. And suddenly something that was just a simple task of watching a screen and a movie on a TV has changed to something where there's so much light coming that it could potentially be dangerous for someone. And that is why this feature came into being. This is, again, my understanding of the whole thing. I'm not really associated with anyone at Apple, unfortunately, so I don't know. But why are we talking about this? Because you as designers today are not just designing an experience, you're also designing hurdles. When you make a product, you think if you are designing for only a subset of users, you are designing an experience for them. But for everyone else, you have just designed a hurdle. And because of that, it's your responsibility now to do the right thing and start thinking about the people for which you've now created those hurdles. So where do we go from here? We started by talking about why should I care about accessibility, and I've given you 3 points, which is number 1, staying relevant. As you mature, as companies around you mature, you are going to have to start caring about accessibility. Point number 2, you yourself could be the user in this case. You yourself could be in a situation where you are either temporarily, situationally, or permanently facing a disability. So for yourself, for your own sake, design for accessibility. At point number 3, it's the right thing to do. If you can design an experience and at the same time unintentionally design a hurdle for someone, it is your responsibility to do the right thing and design that. So before we almost wrap up the whole thing, let's just quickly touch upon one thing that you can do now that we know why accessibility is important. How should you care about accessibility? If there's just one thing, remember we spoke about person with disability? Just broaden your perspective a little bit and drop an A in there. Persona with disability. That's something that you all should do if you're convinced that accessibility is important, to start to take that one step in the direction. What am I talking about here? Take your typical persona, the one you create as part of your job, and just slap in an accessibility related topic in there. So here, as an example, I've said disability, hearing loss. It could be something else like sight impaired. It could be something else like this user is autistic. So that one step, just drop it in there. You don't need to tell your stakeholders. You don't need to tell your CEOs. Just drop it in there. And what's going to happen is that you're going to start thinking about a user with a disability just subconsciously, and that's the one step we all need to take. In other talks in the future, we'll discuss how you can get into the habit of designing accessibility, but that's something you'll have to do. And it's important to acknowledge that this is not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to be a conscious effort now, but I promise you it'll become muscle memory later. um, it's like when I tell you today to select a typeface for your product, you don't question why that's a thing. When I tell you to create a type scale because I need a bunch of sizes for my product, no questions. When I tell you to pick a color palette, no questions. It's because all of those have become muscle memory for you. But at some point, you all as designers had to make the conscious effort to get there. So doing all of this, at least taking a step in the right direction, will lead you to a point where you will be able to create a world where everybody lives a wholesome life. Before I wrap up the slides and we get into discussions, I just want to quickly acknowledge this presentation uses an accessibility typeface called Atkinson Hyperlegible, which is from the Braille Institute, which is actually meant to provide greater legibility and readability to low vision readers. And two quick shout outs. One is Vivek, who's part of my team. He's a crazy storyteller, and he's the one who sort of helped me chop up this really long thing into a short, concise little presentation. And Shubham, who might be on this call, I think he got an invite yesterday for the last minute introduction to Atkinson Hyperlegible, because I was looking for a typeface that looks good while still being accessible, and I got introduced to it. But yes, that is all, folks, for now.
That was very good. Very cool. Thank you for that. We have a lot. I have a few questions. I take first some from the chat after if they have any questions. Please speak about the time phase right now. Can you explain more about how it is more accessible for leaders?
I wished I knew. I am, like I said, I got introduced to it last evening, but I can actually tell you, I was trying to figure out which accessible typeface I could use, and I think we've had conversations about Open Dyslexic. I have tried to use that typeface even on my Kindle to read, and I think because it's not meant for me, every time I try to use it, it's very disturbing. So I was thinking whether I should use that, make it really disturbing for all of you to go through my presentation, and then have make you get that realization that, hey, for a person who's dyslexic, all the other typefaces that you're using, that's their life every single day. Fortunately, I did find another good example, and I just used that because I also wanted to, put the point across that accessibility doesn't mean you have to make things ugly. They can still be good, look good, and that's what I wanted to do through the slides that I had. But
Understood. Okay, so the next question here would be when you were starting to learn about accessibility, I think ask this question to everyone, which was like a condition that like you were really fascinated by, that you were like, wow, I never knew this was a thing before, if you remember.
I mean, if I was firstly starting to learn, I'm still in that phase. I am still in the phase where I'm starting to learn about accessibility. I have not matured enough. Maybe I know a little, few more things than other people here. Oh, Shubham, by the way, is on the chat and he's just dropped how that particular typeface makes it more legible. So people in the chat can take a look at it. Uh, that said, every time I come across someone with a particular disability, that's the first step in my mind is blown every single time, is the thing. I know as an overview, there are so many disabilities that exist out there. Uh, but every time, I mean, even your talk about ADHD, designing for ADHD, that's when my mind opened up and oh my God, like these are things that I have to think about. It's very one of the if I reverse that, a disability where someone's visually disabled, either low vision or no vision, um, that always pops up when you're talking about accessibility because we're talking about digital products and a lot of digital products are screens. So that's the only disability where the screen is completely cut off. So it's very obvious to talk about that disability, right? But there are other scenarios where someone has lost a limb. How do they use the system? Where someone has a neurological disorder. What do they perceive? How do they understand things? They're all um, equally relevant, important, and I just get, my mind just gets blown every time I learn more about them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Are there what's like a accessibility accommodation that you've seen software that you were like, damn, this is amazing. If you have,
I want to say this dim lights thing, the dim lights thing that I talked about. I mean, at a very basic level, my dad using his phone at a magnified scale is like the thing I see every day. Every time I pick up his phone, I'm like, why are things so big? And then I, realize if he's looking at an iPhone, he's doing this. So, that's a good thing. But this dim lights thing, definitely like, I, the first time I turned it on, it was just because it was a feature that got released. And I was thinking to myself, why are my videos suddenly dull? Why don't they look right? And it was that point where I was soon at Moon that I suddenly realized that, okay, this is why it's important. So yes, that feature.
another a little bit of a personal question might be you can feel free to now answer. Since you are at a consulting company, are there companies that you worked with that you tried to like include a feature for accessibility and they were like, oh god, like no, we don't want to do this extra effort? Or have there been like other conflicts that you had to navigate around? Like how did you navigate those kind of conflicts with companies?
Mm. Um, Maybe I'll answer it this way. Every time we've asked someone, should we consider accessibility while designing for this? I would say maybe like out of 10 companies that I've asked, maybe only one has said that yes, because that's a thing in our own company. So we don't really see a lot of organizations acknowledging upfront that they'd want to use it. And that is why one of the objectives that I have personally at DesignNet and anywhere else that I'm interacting with is making accessibility part of the design process. So we don't have to ask for, so we don't ask for permission when we select a color palette or select a typography scale, right? That's everyone knows that's part of the process. I want to make accessibility just part of the process.
Yeah, I think we kind of sometimes forget that it doesn't really take that much effort to make it basic level accessibility. And then there are certain conditions that you have to take extra care with. But to do that basic level accessibility, just like small changes here and there, you have a product that is mostly pretty usable for most people. And, they don't even, some, sometimes I feel like we don't include those kind of voices in our personas and we kind of forget they exist. But yeah, having them accommodated right at the start, and then you completely after that, after you've done all the basic work, you could just forget about it and move on to other probability solving. So yeah.
One thing in that direction, I'll just quickly mention, while I was having this conversation with my team, we got to a point where like, why is accessibility not easy? And I made a statement which the team was like, hey, that's a very bold statement. I said it's Figma's fault. And okay, when I'm saying it's Figma's fault, it's not just Figma, it's XD, it's any other tool that we use. These tools are not giving us designers the tools to make things accessible. The example is when Figma released tokens, we started caring about design systems even more deeply. If tomorrow Figma releases a feature where they include the ability to include alt text, for example, I'm sure every PM and every engineering team out there is going to be like, hey, designer, it's your responsibility. Your software can do it. Give me alt text for all the images. So at some level, it is Figma's fault for not accelerating the, accessibility doing possible.
Definitely. Another thing that I remembered from Galma's talk when she talked about buttons, and sometimes the button just that click here, right? That made me think about like if I could just get um, like a voiceover on my websites and then I close my eyes and try to use it. You try to do that once and you're like, wait, hang on, this changes our perspective on how to design altogether. And it's just like you spend an hour doing it and then you learn how to get around these kind of things. So yeah, yes. I would also urge everyone here to like try to navigate digital spaces with the perspective. Like some of the disabilities are kind of simulatable, not all of them. Obviously, I don't promote this, but some of them are very much like easily you can put yourself in their shoes and see what it looks like for us. So yeah, you should do that. Let me check if there are any other questions on the chat. I like a lot of the arrows mentioned by people today. And you think that I saw a lot of questions. Jesse. Yeah,
That's exactly what I'm seeing as well.
yeah. I'm appreciating the anecdotes and like examples here. So yeah, this has been great. Folks, if you like,
There's one question.
yeah,
There's one question coming in.
just touching us.
I also have the chat open now, so I can like see what's going on. But um, it's wonderful. I think the objective. Oh, there you go. Okay, was the white in your slides actually a light gray to reduce contrast, or was my phone dimming the lights? Not sure if that's the feature. I don't know. I mean, the look of the slides is just something that I liked, and I just wanted to use it like that. So there was no intention behind like um I mean, maybe the whole contrast thing is still there. I didn't want it to be like completely white cube, but black text sort of the thing. So that sort of thing. But I don't think I intentionally did anything specific there. One question is still coming in. How far do you go while designing for accessibility when there are limited constraints and time frame? So I think that's where I want to go back to what I was saying, right? And the point just above there, right, which is muscle memory. Today, if you have to do it, it's going to be extra time. It's going to be something that needs to be extra. But a couple of things that I have planned in my mind for thinking about, either doing it with my team or maybe, as AOH, we try out something together. You want to get to a point where some of those things just happen. Like they don't take extra time. They're things that we do. I think color contrast is like the easiest example because there's a plugin available. Almost everyone is like, I can quickly check that, and they just like do it. And it does not. You don't have to like put it in your estimation separately that I'm going to be checking color contrast, right? So that's the point we want to get to, where it's just a thing that you do. It doesn't require an extra frame, but it will right now. If that question is there, it will take extra time, and you may have to do it on your own time because I don't think your clients are going to feel like, hey, I'm going to give you more money.
I see this question. I would like to a little bit answer from my perspective, which is how do you see accessibility with respect to human evolution of species? So there was a time when we hadn't invented specs yet, and then people like those who couldn't see very well couldn't be in the army, couldn't do jobs and stuff like that, and it was a major disability. And now spectacles are just you see in the world, and you're like, yeah, people are so right. So that's probably what it's going to be like with respect to this as well. I feel like it's just gonna evolve, and one day people are so used to it, they'll wonder, they can't imagine a world without it. And then you hear a historical fact that oh yeah, before lab people really couldn't see, and they kind of hallucinated things, came up with stories and stuff like that, and you're like, oh wait, hang on, what? Yeah, there are like a lot of side stories and things like that people now speculate could just be that this person couldn't see very well, and that's why the story is like happened. So yeah.
I agree there. There's actually one slide that I'd added, which I removed at the last moment, where I was saying that accessibility and value of life go hand in hand. So you'll notice in countries where the value of life is high, they are caring about accessibility, whether it's physical or digital, and that's why the example of the Western countries. And if I draw a parallel, we maturing or becoming growing as a country, we are going to get to a point where we'll also be valuing life more than what we do now, and that's when, as a human species, we get to where we care about accessibility for it.
Mm. Yep, yep, yep. And yeah, I think
But is examples of Indian products? There's a question to Salish. Any Indian products, SaaS that really care about accessibility? I haven't used any recently. I don't know if can't use.
it's also hard to detect as like typical users, right? Like we would have to hear from someone that's like, oh wow, this I use this and then I've always settled with this thing and it's solved it.
I mean, the Fire invited over someone who had, I think, like 98% vision loss or something to our studio to give a talk, and he said he's never shopped on it was either Amazon or Flipkart. He mentioned one of them because neither their apps nor their websites were accessible, so he just couldn't shop from them. So I mean, it's really kind of
I'm right. I don't know. Yeah, I really lost for Amazon.
exactly. Exactly. It's hard. Oh yes. Look,
But everyone has what it is probably like.
yeah.
I don't,
I mean, different topics
but there are
that we can.
there are some countries that still have quite a high population for, but they're still. I mean, the US is the another example, right? Like since you stayed there and noticed it also not against national population.
It's more of a culture thing, is what I feel like. Yeah. Eventually, you start. I mean, if we look back in our history, maybe we had that care, and then sort of it went away, and maybe at some point we did that. But everyone's in that same trajectory. Like wherever a country is, no matter where they are, as they grow, they'll start caring about things which are not, roti kapda look. They will go beyond that.
That helps. Okay, Hicks. I think that please let us know what you thought about us on Twitter or on Instagram. Post about the session if you liked it. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for coming and spending your Sunday with us. And Abhimanyu, thanks a lot for these conversations and you're promoting accessibility in general. It's great hearing from you. And thank you, everyone. Have a great, nice weekend. Bye.
Thank you.